Just by way of a quick introduction here for our academic and closing keynote, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joe Valacich. Joe is the Munsinger Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Arizona and is also co-founder, chairman, and chief science officer of NeuroID Incorporated. So, of course, many of us are familiar with Joe's academic work as a very active member of AIS and the HCI community at large. But building on that, in recent years, Joe and his collaborators have been working toward commercialization of their HCI research with his company, Neuro-ID. It's a really innovative concept where they've created a platform for better understanding customers by observing their nuanced interactions with websites and applications. And as I've come to understand, I think we'll even get to see some of that technology in action today. So looking forward to that. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Joe.
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. And I want to first thank the committee for inviting me to do this. It's really fun to kind of talk about this topic for us, just because the company is really kind of across the chasm is the term of kind of getting product market fit, and that selling to innovators early on they buy the sizzle, but to get to the main part of the market, you really have to have features and deliver value and do it at scale. And so we've done that. So it's kind of a fun story I hope we'll talk about. And so I have my partner in crime, not really, but Jeff Jenkins here, who is a whiz kid, I'll say, and he's going to be doing the demos, and I'll be teeing that up a little bit for him in here. And I saw Fiona on, and I wanted to basically say there is a publication that's kind of the story of our journey that's published in Transactions of HCI, and it was published in the current issue. So if you want to read a little bit more detail in what we've done and kind of where we've gone and even what we've learned, this is a talk about that. And it builds on, if you were here earlier, when Manasvi spoke. Well, there we go. So I wanted to just when Manasvi spoke, he talked a lot about the same things. I had a little bit of a technology hiccup there, so I was a little scared that I had to do something. But okay, basically, big picture is, when people have emotion or cognitive changes, it changes their fine motor control. And this really is groundbreaking for us. I remember when we really truly understood the linkage between cognitions and emotion and neuromotor control. It was quite exciting. And then the idea of doing this at scale and using HCI devices as our sensors, our fine-grained sensors. And so that's really kind of the big picture of what we do. And this is the comment that I wanted to talk about that got us so excited. We use this in a lot of our papers, but basically, movements of the hand offer continuous streams of output that can reveal ongoing dynamics of cognitive processing, potentially capturing the mind in motion with fine-grained temporal sensitivity. I get chills just reading it because it's so true. And we're going to and we can kind of show it. So when Manasvi spoke earlier, he talked about different metrics. He talked about navigational metrics. He talked about typing or navigational behavior and time. One of the metrics that we use is typing. And if you don't know how you do typing metrics, it's basically we look at key presses, and then more sophisticated than that is key presses in pairs or trigraphs, and you look at these differences in time between key press 1 and key press 2, and there's some interesting things about that, because in the old days on a typewriter, if you over typed 2 letters, it would clog and stop. But our keyboards are smart. They'll allow you to overpress, and the first letter press gets entered, then the second if there's an overpress, and lo and behold, there's some relationships between familiarity and fine motor control that has to do as you're more familiar, your transition times will tend to be tighter, and in fact even can overlap. And so then you start thinking, wow, someone who's more familiar with information could have more consistency. in these transition times. So that's actually kind of another little insight. And so you can learn that if someone's having really poor transition times, maybe there's another excuse for that. Maybe they're not very familiar with the information. So there's all kinds of just key press metrics, whether something happens, like when we look at what a mean is, or how much did it vary? Was it really long and short, or quick and slow? And what's fastest, what's slowest, and things like mean time, transitions, and breaks, and over presses, and that can be a binary, or you can count those, and you can create ratios between negative and a non-negative transition. So you can see where you just build metrics up, and then you try to see what works, right? So, and then in mouse movements, it's the same kind of thing. And here's a little a diagram between two points, and the points could be a click to click, or it could be a point to a pause. And you take from those types of behaviors, you can derive dozens of metrics. These are just some examples, and you see the vector between A and B, idealized response trajectory, but then you've got the actual distance as kind of a exaggerated mouse movement there, just to be able to talk about these metrics. But you can look at what's the maximum deviation off that idealized response trajectory. What is the additional distance? Is there axis flips? And if I had Jeff speak up right now, he could probably rattle off 20 or 30 more. So there's lots of ways to measure those movements. But probably one of the things that we've learned as in the commercialization process is as important as those metrics are, how you type, swipe, and touch, is the interaction behavior metrics about not just kind of the raw data, but some other things like especially thinking about someone's identity. Did it autofill? Did the browser autofill when they got to their name? Was there a pause or hesitation when typing? You could think about, what about the inline changes? Were there minor changes or major changes? How many changes did they, for me, my browser will autofill Joe depending upon what I type, or Joseph, depending, if I start putting in an address or something. And so if I get rid of the E, but then fill out Joseph, right? Then that's not so bad. A minor might be good, but a major change all the way back and over, I might be taking over someone's identity, right? So you have to start thinking about these behaviors and what the meaning is. And really it's the context that tells you that. Like, when's a copy and a paste? There might be instances where a copy and a paste, or leaving the form and returning to the form and a copy and paste, might be really good, right? It might be you wanted to know my routing number for my bank. Well, I don't know that off the top of my head. And maybe if I did know it off the top of my head, that might be a bad thing. And so this idea of combining behaviors, you leave the page, you return to the page, you paste the answer, might be good for a tracking number, but it's not good if it's your name, because you should have long-term memory and muscle memory, and you should type that really, really well, or it should autofill. And so you always have to look at the context to what the behavior potentially means. And then by putting things together, this is some NeuroID, this is a little NeuroID chart, but it's basically looking at kind of identity information. But what NeuroID really does, people say, what does NeuroID do? And I probably one of the simplest ways to describe what we do is that we take large populations and we cut them into different strata, low, high risk, or whatever, or based upon some criteria. And the criteria can be different things. It could be risk, or it could be fraud potential, but it also could be, is this person a shopper, or is this person a buyer? And so by doing this and using these metrics, like, and this is from real data, we've got 65% of the total population, and it's 99.3% true and genuine. Almost no fraud there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we can say that we have other data where we have just 2.5%, but it's 58% of the fraud. And so by having these types of models, you provide a value to our customers, where in the prior years, they have to treat every person the same through a customer journey. Now we don't, right? They can see and say, we're going to take everyone in this first bucket, the genuine behavior bucket, and we're taking them right to the deal. And for all of those, on the right, let's put them through a 2 or 3 or 4 more step underwriting process so we can know for sure what's going on there. But it allows you to partition and it allows you to focus your resources much better. It's pretty powerful. I guess I'll say that. Okay. And so HCI Dynamics are used to do a lot of things. And so I'm going to be an advocate. I'm trying to give you an advocate for this, for everyone to be a builder, to build on Alex's talk. What does it tell you? Well, the research, there's hundreds of papers out there, mostly in psych and neuroscience, but concealment of prejudices, or how certain and how difficult was it to provide some information. Sometimes it's pretty difficult for someone to provide, say, their salary or their income, because it's confusing. Well, you talk before taxes, after taxes, is it mine? Is it mine and my spouse? Is it, all these kinds of things can be response to difficulty. That could tell you have a usability issue, right? So we can now help improve usability, but it also can help us understand other kinds of things, because what other things and outcomes correlate with that type of behavior, especially when you have looked at hundreds of millions of people filling out these same kind of questions. Cognitive competition, cognitive dissonance. We did a really cool study there where we asked people who we knew were deceptive what it means to be deceptive. It was cheating, and what does it mean to cheat? And then the follow-up questions about the consequences of that. So what should we do to the cheaters? And lo and behold, how they answered those 2 questions basically predicted who were the cheaters. Right? Pretty interesting, right? How people's perceptions form and emotional reactions to things like that. So I'm going to argue here, HCI Dynamics is a scientific methodology. So I get people we get some reviews sometimes, and so those of you who have reviewed, we've had great reviews, but once in a while we'll get a review from someone who says, well, you got this other mouse paper. This is it's the same stuff, right? Well, no, it's really not. It's a scientific method, just like, do we publish more than one survey? Do we publish more than one experiment? And this is the issue. And here's the story that I like to tell about this. When we began behavioral research, it was human observation before we even had journals to publish in. And we observed each other, and it got more formal, and we did case studies. And the strength of case studies are that we get a really deep understanding of a very small sample. And so we don't have generalizability, right? So that's a weakness. So what did we do? We said, we need something that can be broader. We got surveys, and especially with online delivery, they're highly scalable. So we can get a lot of people to participate, very diverse set, but now we have limited depth and richness. And HCI Dynamics, human-computer interaction data, is observation at scale. And that really is what NeuroID does, observation at scale. So I'm going to give you a couple things that are going to be, I hope you think, fun. Maybe you've seen some of this before from me, but this particular study was really looking at this kind of the early days of the work that we reported today, that Manospi had his video and then spoke afterwards, was really trying to understand and measure bias. He was showing about how to clean data and remove it, but this was how to measure it and then use that measure in the analysis. And so I'll show you a couple videos here that hopefully will be really revealing. But in order to make this study work, we had to kind of, in some way, create a biased environment. Students weren't really sure whether they were anonymous or not. This class was a class they needed to get into or needed to complete successfully in order to get into the upper division of a really competitive program. And so being asked about their intentions to come to class and so on was kind of a big deal. So let's take a look at a low bias, what I'll call a low bias response. Attending class is a valuable use of time. Well, I'm on a single little tablet, and so it's trying to manage a little bit. So look at this. That was 3 seconds. there was one answering event and a pretty high accuracy. And you'll say, well, relative to what? Well, let's say relative to this next page. Oh, wait, there we go. So look at this one. Attending class is a valuable use of time. I disagree. Then it's like, wait, I need to get into the upper division, and this person might know who it is. Look at all of that indecisiveness. Strongly agree. Boom. Well, 18 seconds, 3 different answers, and then look at all those multiple hovers. So we start, so very low accuracy. So we think about behavior, time, and navigation. Boy, there is a lot there. Those are very different responses. So how we analyze it is basically, this was an intentions to behavior study. We had the baseline model that basically, it was significant, as you would expect it to be. Intentions did predict attendance, but we created a bias capturing model. And this is where we then took in the response time and the deviations, not even the behaviors, very simple analysis early on, and added that as a comparison. It's kind of a horse race. What happens if we use their response time and just their overall mousing navigation as moderators? Well, by including the response behaviors as moderators, it nearly doubled the R-squared. I mean, just kind of what Minosky scored. So the power of behavior. Here's another one. This one has been around a while, but we finally got it accepted at the quarterly. So, but basically, if you haven't seen this study, it was framed as the context was people were testing a new way of capturing damage on an insurance claim form. But basically, it was for us to capture their mouse movements and such in a scenario. And their incentive is that they got paid a base payment plus some remaining endowment as they played this game or did this testing for us, random order of these 5 separate accidents. So to be fraudulent, because you had to pay them for each of these scenarios, you lost your deductible. And so you'd have to do the damage. And so what people realize is if I get increase my damage, I get more back over the deductible. And so people had to deliberately, and we knew the order of the tasks, and they had to deliberately decide to add damage in order to get more money. And so they did. And again, someone might say, well, if you put more damage, you're gonna have more movements, but we normalize that and we talk about that. So don't worry about that. That all gets handled in the observation. So we had 80 out of the 395 valid observations were fraudulent. And as we would expect, the fraudsters had greater deviations in their movements and they had slower speeds. But more importantly, and this is really where you start saying, hey, you can build a business around this idea, is looking at how well did that infer, how well did that data reveal who were the cheaters? And look at the R-squared on that logistic regression and look at the accuracy rate with just 2 data features. So it's pretty cool. So then again, that's a couple of you or a few of you I know have probably seen this, but this was like, so we decided, hey, we got to do this and figure out how to do this. And so this was our first customer, and it was a payday loan company that was up in Phoenix, and we made a little form for them. And so we created questions where we had what we called baselining questions that should be pretty easy for them to answer a particular way. Did you provide a working phone number in this application? Yes, I did that. And is the bank account number that you provided us that you hope we're going to push money into, was that your personal bank account? And that'd probably be yes, and so on. And so there's these baselining questions, and we'd always have what we called risk relevant questions, whatever the risk was. And in this case, are you able to afford the scheduled payment? So we looked at the finance literature, and you start looking at why people default on loans. A lot of times it would be you got injured and didn't have insurance, you've got divorced, or have a bad medical situation. I think it's something like that. But and they often they'd run out of money. And so the question is, are you able to afford the scheduled payments? Let's watch the response. So this is just you see that's a vertical scroll. You can see how noisy this data is. And so you have to do all kinds of noise reduction and watch this. So it was one of those, we'd get a batch of data and we would then tell this one was good or this one wasn't. And they didn't really believe in what we were doing at that time. It was just kind of they were being nice to us in many ways. And we told them that this person had a lot of concern here on this particular risk question. They wrote the loan anyway, and the person didn't make the first payment. They knew that if they said no, they probably wouldn't get the loan. At least that was their inference, and of course that's how the results came out.
First of all, let me just jump in while we give a chance to people to enter the questions in the chat and say, I remember, in fact, I was chatting with Milena as we were watching this. We're going to put on the spot here because we remember, Joe, sitting in the room in a workshop several years ago and hearing you present your mouse movement study, or the first mouse movement study. And it's just incredible to see the sophistication of the approach that's developed over the years, just like a theoretical paper, a conceptual paper that undergoes multiple rounds of reviews at a top journal. And then, so to get it to the point that it is now, so sophisticated and so impactful. And I just wanted to say congratulations to you, Jeff, and the rest of the team for what you've accomplished over the years. We couldn't be more proud of you, our fellow HCI members, and the rest of the NeuroID team, which the sky's the limit.
Hey,
so congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, but I do want to make sure that I say this. Mark Grimes was on this journey with us. Christoph Schneider was with us. A couple of our PhD students in there in the room, David Kim and Manasvi Kumar. We didn't do this without a lot of help. And then all our NeuroID colleagues, now more than 70 people. It's really, and if you heard me talk a month ago, it would have been 40 people. So that gives you an idea of what's happening in the marketplace right now. So yeah, thank you. It's really been a blast, and the best co-founder on earth right there.
That's right here. So, and there's something to be said, I think, as all of you know, of sticking with the research stream through the thin and thick and hard and easy times. It's that persistence over years and years where you can really discover some neat things. So I appreciate the support through that.
And before I turn it over to Anna and Mark for questions, I had a thought, or as you're presenting your methodology, Joe, and going back to the comment that you made, how some reviewers would say, what is this? Like, or there's no theory or something of the sort, right? And I was thinking actually that hesitation or the movements that were demonstrated by Jeff, there is a clearly some mechanism, cognitive mechanism, that is happening when the stimulus is being processed. And at that point, there's a conscious decision, that a conscious evaluation that is happening. So I'm not sure what the mechanism would be, but there's clearly something that can be brought in to reinforce or to provide a grounding that some of these reviewers may be seeking.
Well, there's really strong cognitive and neuroscience theory that supports what is happening. And some people look at some of the stuff about thinking fast, thinking slow, system 1, system 2. Exactly. When you are in a mode where it's intuition versus really hard thought. Well, if I'm satisficing on a survey, I'm actually in a system 1. So it means, what am I going to do? I'm basically just my heuristic. Click the first thing that comes up. right? And so, and then if I'm going to be a fraudster, in addition to the behavioral difference, but if Jeff Jenkins types Jeff and Jenkins, basically the same. That's what our research shows. But when he types Jeff Valacich, he types Jeff way better than Valacich. Well, that's really important. So now all of a sudden we have a new tell. If the first name and the last name, if a person is more familiar with the first name than the last name, then that's a very big fraud indicator, right? Because you should be equally fluid with both names, but you're not. So in a Western society, Joe, Jeff, right, David, those names are going to be typed faster and easier because you have easier memory of it. You've probably typed it more often than trying to answer or write a much tougher name. And it's through this long journey that both the theory predicts, but then the data confirms. And then that's then when you're there, then you can write real-time models, right? Because now you know. So, but it's been really cool, the things that we've learned.
Joe, just a comment on that one. When a female traditionally gets married and changes her name, half of your population will be fraudulent because I think many people who are in this room who have gone through that will attest that the first few years are a little tricky.
Answer that one. Yes, that's a great point. I want to be clear that no fraud decision can be made off of typing dynamics alone, right? And there's another question this ties into too. What if this was made publicly to the world? There's actually, our latest fraud model has, it's a Idibus tree model, and it has 1,000, it uses hundreds of metrics in 1,000 different trees put together into one. So the actual detection of fraud is very, very complex. But one thing alone will not trigger. Well, at least that one thing alone won't trigger. There are a few others.
Yeah, and on that, two things. We designed this so that we never know the PII. We never can tie it to a person. We score the push down releases. The behavior gets sent to NeuroID. The client who has the relationship with the customer is the only one who knows, who can tie that together. And so there's no data bank being built on people by NeuroID. So no one looks at us, GDPR issues that we have none, we've been reviewed because it basically it's not tied to anyone, it can't be made. But you can say that in general, the population, the crowd, when they commit fraud, these are the things that tend to happen, right? Or if it's authentic and genuine, these are the things that tend to happen. And so it's not used for credit scoring. It may change though the journey a person takes. If you are doing things that are more like a fraudster than a genuine person, they may put you through 2 or 3 or 4 more steps. But there's no indication on whether you get a loan or anything like that. So we've been really careful to try to, in fact, we can tell you some great stories, people who had really poor credit because of an event or a divorce or some other kind of nasty thing in life. And what we found, what some of our customers have found is that where they really have these credit invisible people who can't get good loans and they get taken advantage and having to pay these payday loans, the technology is revealing that they're very solid in providing their information, and it's become a proxy for a good risk. And so this is actually a good thing. It's helping, it's reducing fraud that is good for society, and it's actually helping people who need credit services, and everyone at some point in their life needs credit services. And so the idea that we're actually helping the people who need it the most is really a good thing.
Yeah, I'll answer.
Really interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to answer a few of these other questions.
Awesome.
Here as well, unless there's a follow-up on that. There's a question on, is there one quick question, do you have a version for people using mobile devices without using a mouse? Absolutely. So in the data we observe, 70% of users today in online forums are mobile users. Only 30% are filling out applications using desktop devices. And I just saw a stat, I wish I could remember it, the other day, of what percentage of people are only mobile users. And to me, it was surprisingly high. And so there's been a lot of research put into time around what are mobile indicators of friction and fraud and other things.
Having multiple devices and keyboards and big screens and stuff is different for wealthy or people who are just getting by. And so people who are doing fully online lending, they're probably not at the Wells Fargo, right? Because they can't get a loan from Wells Fargo. So they're online, and more often than not, it's on mobile. So yes, we have to, I'd say the models work as good or better on mobile as they do on cursor.
There's a quick question here that I think is relevant to several different stats and research in this area about what if they're using different types of keyboards? How does that affect results? With the number of the stats, it's not, you have to account for things like that. For example, a keyboard format aside, I type very differently than my mother does, right? And my kids. And so one thing that we have to investigate is, where does it make sense to compare you against the other next person? Where does it make sense to compare you against you? Meaning that over a short period of time, the first 5, 6 questions you answer, we can develop a baseline of what typing normally looks like for you. And typing is one of those where it becomes much more meaningful and less noise if you understand who that person is who's typing. Meaning that over a number of questions, you can sort of get what their baseline is and say, hey, based on how you normally type. Again, I'm using typing as example because it's easy to understand, but not that it's the indicator of fraud. You're typing this other thing with very little familiarity based off of how you type.
And just a comment from me, the advancements in the dashboard and the plugin and stuff like that, really, really cool stuff you guys are doing.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
And you do have a note of appreciation from Reza for his future loan applications.
I love that. It's hilarious. We can talk. I can get you some information, right? What I'm most excited about, the loan stuff is very useful, but what I'm even more excited about is when we take this static internet and make it dynamic, so you get a website that's tailored to who you are, what you want it to be, which is not a loan or fraud context, it's a usability context, but really excited about that as well.
Let me talk about that concept just for a second, because this is pretty cool. So in consumer behavior literature, they talk about, where do you go to buy things? And I'm going to overgeneralize this, but if you want a loaf of bread or a carton of milk, you stop at the 7-Eleven or whatever the little store is on the way home. You don't go to Costco, but every website is Costco. When you think about from an e-commerce standpoint, and the idea that once a person has a product that they want, the consumer behavior literature says, then get out of the way and let them buy it, right? And whether it's an impulse purchase or whatever, I mean, you let them convert. And by having this kind of one size fits all, there's all this other stimuli that can catch the attention of a person as they're trying to get to that, to convert that deal. Think now about what Jeff just demoed, and being able to then say that this person is indicating they're moving towards a utilitarian process. This person is moving to convert a sale. What do? We lean the stimuli away and let them convert as fast as we can. Because we know, right? We know, we've learned it through intent, versus giving them still the same process to get there and maybe not get out. And so on the other hand, if someone is searching for things and they're not sure and they're all over the place, well, what you do is you give them more, right? You give them a little bit more, a richer environment to try to capture that attention so that you can then send them down. So now we start thinking about that it's not just adaptive based upon data mining on the past. It's adaptive in real time based upon your behavior. And it's not necessarily the product changes, but the interface changes to make it easier to convert. So, I mean, that's what understanding and being able to act on this data in real time potentially means. Anyway.
There's a comment on education, on the amazing opportunities. Absolutely. We've done some research in that area, and another time I would love to talk with you about the applications, education, and mastery of information, amongst other things. I totally agree.
And Mark Grimes, plug Mark, has done some really great research there, looking at how well people could spell words in a particular domain can predict whether their expertise in the domain, right? He had some made up security terms that were made up, and people who had good security couldn't type those any better than the people who were novices. But when they got to real security terms, it separated the bunch. So the competency of just the terms, you could have a proxy for really their actual skill. Very cool.
Looks like you have to live forever because you have so much research to still do. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great area, and I think this idea in the surveys and observation at scale, and I think it's all of us need to push this idea that this is observation at scale. It is a method. It is not a one-off that we've already seen the mouse movements one. We don't want to see any more of that.
Can't wait for the day when we have a cool little HCI Dynamics conference we'll hold at some exotic location. Invite you all to it.
Yeah.
So we need other researchers in this area.
I want to say thanks for letting us do what we do and talk about our research and our life. I mean, it really has become a life over the past few years. So we'll see you all downstairs for those, and those we'll see in the cyber. I hope I see you in person at HCIS or ICIS next year or somewhere. So it's really been fun, I have to say, to see people in person.